first, I want to thank you again for giving us the time and day for you to be interviewed by us. It's an honor, and we appreciate it.
My
I
pleasure.
think to just kind of start us off, I think what Heinen and I are trying to succeed in our mission is we're trying to get people our age, 18 to 30, to try and think about what it means to actually have an alternative. Because it's one thing, I think, to be rebellious against the oppressive system that we're all in, but what do you replace it with? And one of the things that we've really been promoting is this Kennedy speech that he gave at American University. And I believe you're familiar with it. Is that correct?
Sure.
Yeah.
One of
And
the great speeches of the century.
so it's the 60th anniversary of that speech, I think in 3 days or so. And what is it exactly? What is your characterization of that speech, its importance, and how do I get people my age to actually go to that as their vision for the future?
The speech kind of went under the radar at the time, as I remember. It wasn't particularly noted until afterward. Kennedy had a very busy last 6, 8 months of his life. This was extremely, many things were happening. It's interesting that he gave that speech almost a couple of days apart from when he gave his civil rights speech about the situation in Alabama. He gave a beautiful speech. You should familiarize yourself with that speech too, because it was one of the really first eloquent statements about civil rights. And it prefaced a lot of what Martin Luther King was going to say in his I Have a Dream speech. In fact, well, I'm sorry, it did come after his, well, no, the I Have a Dream speech came in August, correct? August 63. No, it was right before it. It was actually a few months before it. You should read that speech because it's got grandiloquence to it, and he quotes Lincoln, and it's a beautiful speech. But his peace speech is extremely, to me, layered. It's a layered speech. He mentions many themes, among them reconciliation with the Soviet Union, and that was so important. And it was, as you know, it came after his near confrontation with the end of the world in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. This speech said that we're on the path to get it together with the Cold War was a myth. He knew this, but I mean, it's very hard to move a country away from a Cold War situation when you're spending billions of dollars on defense. As Eisenhower himself said, it's funny that Eisenhower spent the most amount of money, at the same time left behind a situation which he said was tragic. He said this is all the functions of state are going to be poisoned and contaminated by this relationship with business and the defense industry. And he meant it, and he was right. God damn it. So, and Kennedy carried that on, and he saw the same problem, although he didn't agree with Eisenhower on many things. And I think one of the most beautiful things in the speech was he recognizes the contribution of the Soviet Union in World War II. How many people were killed in the Soviet Union fighting the Nazis, fascism? He at the time he said something like 26 million or something. But the truth is, now we know the numbers are going up, and the latest actual research numbers are something closer to 39 million, and something like 20 some million were soldiers. So it's quite a huge sacrifice they made, and that is what has played a huge role in the Russian attitude towards the West. And people, I guess, in the West don't really recognize that. They don't realize the 4 or 5 of every German soldier killed in World War II was killed on the Eastern Front, not on the Western Front. Now, that's not to say the West did not contribute. They did. Lend-Lease was very big to Russia. Lend-Lease, we were shipping them petroleum, all kinds of products, which were crucial to their effort and kept them going at a time when they were very, very deprived of everything. But you have to say the Russians did pull themselves up by the bootstrap. And Kennedy, he acknowledged the damage done to their country. He said 1/3 of that country, basically the Ukraine area, the whole the whole western section of the country had been decimated by the Nazis. It was so he said from here to Chicago would be the equivalent, meaning in the Soviet Union. From New York, from Washington to Chicago is what he was relating to. In that speech, he also and he said it's time to realize this, and it's time for our countries to basically get it together and respect each other. And he emphasized not a Pax Americana. That was what people were thinking at the time, that it was an American peace governed by American weapons of war, which is what we have to some degree now in the world. In other words, he was counseling a real peace of understanding, of compassion, of mutual respect. And we never achieved that, believe it or not. We never achieved that. Briefly, I believe, he was killed in 16, soon thereafter, and his peace initiative with the Soviet Union went down in the toilet. Lyndon Johnson was a pedestrian politician and a stupid man because he got himself involved in a ridiculous war 6,000 miles away. He knew, he must have known better than to do that, and he kept fighting it. He never gave up because America cannot lose. It's a point of honor that Nixon kept emphasizing. We have to have a peace with honor. That peace with honor cost the Vietnamese millions of people, and it cost American lives quite a bit, and it destroyed a lot of the country in the sense of up here, our morale. We came back from that war, and I was a soldier there, much more callous about the world, we didn't consider at that time Asian people to be human beings in the same level that we were. I mean that it was a form of racism, but that existed, and it still exists. Now, of course, we've come to respect the Asian race because they made a lot of money, and they're very good at business and organization and society and these people. But at that time, it was a whole other ballgame, and that war was one of the insanities of life that you have to live through. Everyone's going to live through some kind of insanity. I'm sure you will too, or you probably have already. But anyway, Kennedy's dream was shattered, but it still exists. It exists in the hearts of men and women and the young generation who he inspired. Ron Kovic, whose book I made, Born on the 4th of July, into a movie, was one of those people who was very inspired by Jack Kennedy. And many people were. And he's coming around now in history again to be recognized. He was dismissed, marginalized by the shortness of his office by the historians, saying that he was a good speech guy, but he didn't really accomplish anything, which is really unfair if you really look at what he did. And we don't have time to go into that now. We're not talking about John Kennedy, but people like Noam Chomsky have just not up to date on the research and all the things that Kennedy did and tried to do. And speaking to all the African countries, to Nasser in the Middle East, to Indonesia, Sukarno, he was really reaching out to the third world. You can say he was a third world conscious person. And he knew that there was a history of oppression against the third world. And he knew that the Russians were getting the better advantage of it because frankly, they hadn't been in Africa oppressing or colonizing the place. So Russia was much more appreciated by neutral countries in those days. But you couldn't be neutral because the United States kind of came down on you. John Foster Dulles' policy was that neutrality is appeasement. Am I going on too much? I think we should maybe get a little faster. Your point was about the speech.
This is all good. No, we're not gonna.
Say one thing about your question is. No, I'm sorry. The famous speech, yes, Pax Americana.
Yeah.
The kind of peace that makes life on Earth worth living. That is what is so important. Worth living. I made a film now. It's just called Nuclear Now. It's just coming out. It's on Amazon as of today, and iTunes and Google Play. You can watch it. It's about. I'm sorry. It's about energy and what are we going to do for the future? How do we keep the quality of life that we want on this earth? We're not getting that. We're getting this pollution. New York today is buried in pollution. The point is that clean energy is the solution. And people don't have the facts on clean energy. And that's one of the reasons that motivated me to do the film, because I worked with scientists and I wanted to get everything correct, because I feel that nuclear energy was never given the respect it deserved. You get these agendas from Davos, from all these world organizations. They talk about the future and blah, blah, blah. I never see nuclear energy. As they always talk about renewables, solar, hydropower, and wind, but they're not they're good and we like them, but they're not the solution. They're not going to make up the volume that we need, which is continent size. The world, we're thinking not just about the United States, we're thinking about the whole world. You can see the movie, it makes a very important point. We need nuclear energy. We need it now. We need it big and a lot of it. We need to build, and we can. It's all been we did it for 50 years. We've been doing it. It works. There was one accident that was lethal. It was at Chernobyl, and it's all explainable. And it's ridiculous. Any industry has to go through a period of growth, and it's important that it has be tested. And that's what's been happening. They've been building plants, 400 and some all over the world, and they're working. And here we are, like questioning the nuclear energy. It's a ridiculous argument, because if you compare the deaths of nuclear energy to the deaths of coal and oil, is not even close. It's magnitudes different. The charts are in the film. So here we are obsessing about melodramatic things, like a plane crash becomes more important than the numerous car crashes that are going on. In other words, we sensationalize this thing. Everything that goes wrong in nuclear is sensationalized into this catastrophe that's the end of the world, which is nonsense. It's nonsense. Yeah. We have too many examples of success, and we can deal with accidents. We have to. Without accidents, you don't grow.
We were at the premiere of Nuclear Now in New York, or the screening of it.
I'm sorry, I probably was going on.
No, Mr. Stone, please. This is all good. Kynan, I wanted to ask if you wanted to follow up on the question.
Yeah, I actually want to know, you mentioned your war experience in Vietnam, and of course you've talked about in your interviews that your father also served in World War II, and you were living in reality. In your movie Platoon, you show it's a very tough and terrifying reality, but it wasn't what people thought was going on, right? And I want to know, how unique is that experience of war, and how does it separate the people who fight wars from the rest of us that don't? And I think that's crucial for our time right now, where we have the Ukraine war and a lot of things are being said about it, but we really don't understand what's going on. So
your question really is about Ukraine, or about my war experience?
About your war experience.
Yeah, because I think, you and your father have combat experience, and when the layman who talks about war, whether it's supporting Ukraine or not or whatever, you actually have been in it. What is something in general that the layman should know about combat that only you can? Yeah, go on.
In my history anyway, all the people who talk about going to war, fighting wars, have never been in a war. It's ironic that they're the leaders. Lyndon Johnson was a big coward, it seems. George Bush was a coward. He couldn't even serve in the National Guard without problems. He was scared of his horses. Although he wanted the reputation of a macho cowboy, actually he hated riding horses. I mean, there's always this kind of tension. Lindsey Graham, who's one of our worst senators ever, talks about war like he has no experience of it. He was in the intelligence services. Nikki Haley, oh my God, she wants to be president, and here she is calling yesterday for World War III if we don't win Ukraine. How crazy has this thing gone that we're fighting? We want to fight World War III, which is a catastrophe, over Ukraine. Ukraine is 6,000 miles away, and his history with Russia is extremely complicated. I've done 2 films about it. You've got to understand it to even get into it, because America is fighting because of an ideology about Russia. And it's an ideology that's dangerous, wicked, and exactly what John Kennedy was talking about in his peace speech. It's crazy to go against Russia, because potentially we could be the best partners in the world, not only on nuclear energy, which is crucial because Russia is way out ahead of us, as is China. We need allies to combat the world situation, because I think the most threatening thing in the world is pollution and CO2. I really feel that the Arctic ice is melting. Everything is going to get worse and worse and tighter, and more wars, more tension. It's going to be a hell to live there. I'm not going to be there, but after 2050, you might well take all these into consideration. Maybe my film will become a classic then. Maybe it'll be in the Library of Congress or something. I don't have much, they don't give me much critique time, but frankly, I've been warning about this since I read the book, Bright Future by Josh Goldstein and his nuclear engineer partner, Stefan Svist. You saw the film. It's the book is based on a book. It's based on facts. It's all facts. There's not one fact that can be contested in that movie, not one. And I'm very proud of that, because I'm always questioned on, Stone is fictionalizing this and that. Well, everybody's got an opinion on nuclear, but they don't know anything. The same is true, frankly, about Jack Kennedy's death. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion. Oh, I think he was shot by this. I don't know. Blah, blah, blah. I think it was obviously the one man did it. But, they don't really, people don't spend time investigating it. That's what I do with my films and in my documentaries.
Yeah, well, no, listen, well, for one, I mean, I visited Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, where they were doing groundbreaking research on fusion. One of the things your film ends on is fusion energy, actually, that it could be the hope for the future. And I know that we have now crossed a barrier where we, for the first time in history, have produced more energy with fusion than we are using to actually make it. So, there is a real
absolutely
bright
hope, but there's not really reasonable hope within, according to everyone I've talked to. And I was just up at MIT with Dennis White, who's a genius. He was working on fusion, plasma fusion. He took me through the steps. But, given the amount of money you have to spend to get that energy, it's a no-go right now, because you have to have a scalable, you have to have a scalable, realistic cost to this, to all nuclear, and fission can do it. Fission can do it. Although the United States spends too much money, China, Korea, Japan have done it in a cheaper way, and Russia too. So it can be done.
Yeah, well,
But of course, we have so many environmentalists blocking the procedure with all these legal restrictions that in America, it's almost impossible to build anything, much less, not just in nuclear, but in any industry. It's hard to lay concrete in this country to get things done, to build. We can't replace our bridges. It's amazing that we spend a fortune and yet it dissipates. We don't build bullet trains. we hardly build anymore, and that is a concern. So, I'm looking to Eurasia, I'm looking to Asia, I think even Latin America. I think there is a renaissance that's possible, and I don't discount the United States. The United States is great for innovation. There's 50 companies exploring SMIs, nuclear fission, and they're doing, with government help. 50 of them, we hope, but fusion itself is more a prospect for the latter part of the century, second half of the century, if we make it to the
it's very interesting that you talk about this, because you have a very unique perspective with comparing the United States in the era of the 50s and 60s and to other countries like France. Like, I know you spent summers in France.
My mother was
yeah, and your mother was, yeah, right. You talk about this a little bit in your biography. Could you actually speak on the America that you experienced growing up from your teens and 20s to what you see today?
Yeah. It's very sad to me, but I suppose young people, older people, I don't want to be the guy who says, oh, it was better then. There was a lot of problems back then too. It was a lot more racism. There was a lot more unthought about militarism. And I think people are questioning wars, they're questioning everything now. And sometimes it helps to do that. But there's a partisanship, the gridlock that nothing gets done. And that is a problem, such as nuclear energy. That was the easiest one to solve. That was not an issue, but it became an issue because there's a vocal minority. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that blocks up the whole country, because the country could now be wholly nuclearized. Let's say 80% of our energy, like in France, it's 70% could come from electricity. That would be amazing. And we would be developing hydrogen where it can go. Hydrogen can take us to liquid fuels for airplanes for the future. And it can take us to making industry viable without burning up the whole atmosphere. In other words, we could be producing cement, we could be producing steel, we could be producing agriculture, fertilizer, all with that heat that comes from nuclear energy going through hydrogen as a carrier with and even carbon could make for a world that is clean energy. So out with the oil, out with the gas, and gas is just as bad as oil because gas is methane, as we tried to show in the film, which is invisible, nobody sees it, but it is, as Josh says in the film, 80 times worse than oil in the near term. It's really ugly, methane, and we have a lot more of it. So we're still up to 84%, something like that, of our energy is fossil fuel in the world. Fossil fuel at this point. All that talk about renewables, all that, we haven't changed anything. We're still pissing out the fossil fuel. This is not the Kennedy approach. Kennedy was talking about nuclear energy way back when. So was Eisenhower. They both agreed on that, and most people who are intelligent agree on it. It's just, why can't we get things done? And we're wasting our time in Ukraine. We're fighting a war that we're going to lose. It's humiliating that we're lying about it from the beginning. There hasn't been any truth told in any American newspaper that I've seen. It's unbelievable that people are brainwashed in this country and they believe what they read in the Washington Post or they see on the television networks. It's just so, isn't it? I mean, do you ever hear of one? Do you ever hear the Russian side of the story? I know I haven't heard it. Maybe some brave soul has done it. But if you so much as try to give the Russian side of the story, you're considered an apologist for Putin. You saw my Putin interviews back in 2017 or 18. You know, I was called all kinds of things again, but all it was is a set of questions for him. And the film doesn't take an editorial position. It just lets him speak in his own voice. If you look at all the American shows about Putin, by the way, people don't realize this, but they're seeing a dubbed version of his voice. They don't even see the real voice that Putin does. So you're getting this bluff, angry, bluffing kind of Russian caricature of a Russian man. It's not the way he is at all. He's very soft-spoken. He's a statesman. He has the same qualities as Kennedy. He sees the long picture and he's very patient. If he hadn't been so patient, we would probably be at war now with Russia, considering the things we have done in Ukraine. And a lot of dirty shit has gone down, believe me. That war started, by the way, in 2014. There's no question. That war started. And you were right about that, Jose, to call out, what's her name? And Alexandra Ocasio-Rios or whatever.
Ocasio-Cortez, yeah.
Ocasio-Cortez. Yeah, she's smart. I think she could learn, but they don't want to learn. You know, they're like Nikki Haley. There's a kind of I can't go there because I know it's not politically, it's a negative politically for me to in any way empathize with Russia, which is ridiculous considering that these are the two most strongest nuclear powers in the world. And we're at the very edge of pulling that trigger, which of course would be a disaster for America, and we would lose much more than Russia is losing. If, our industry, our economy would go to shit. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The moment a bomb is blown, it's going to demoralize the entire world.
No, but what you just said though about like how AOC and company don't want to empathize with Putin is exactly the point of the speech. It's JFK is saying, put yourself in the shoes of the Soviets. Look, we don't have to like communism to admire their great history and culture.
But the point is, it isn't communism. It's a new form of capitalism. It's an authoritarian state. Okay, they have a form of democracy. In other words, the Americans won't admit this, but the truth is, if you travel through Russia, you'll see that if Putin were not popular enough, he would be out. That's the way the Russian system works. It's a rough system, tough neighborhood, but if you're not doing what the popular will is, you will be sussed out and removed, as Khrushchev was. Khrushchev was considered too much of an adventurer for what he did in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they got rid of him. And he was totally in charge, we thought, but they got rid of him. And that happens quietly on the Soviet side. And then it happened when we went to their post-communist world with Yeltsin. Yeltsin was a democratically elected, but he had tremendous flaws too. Putin took over and stabilized the country. And so from 2000 to 2023, you will see Russia really got stronger. And it was constantly, and I traced all this in the interviews, it was constantly attacked. There was not one moment when they let up on Putin. It got worse after 2007 when he made his speech at Munich. He did that speech, and you see John McCain, the senator who loves war with Russia, he's sneering at him. All the Americans have never respected the Russian point of view, which is why he's so patient, because it's unbelievable how many red line warnings were given to America before the 22 situation happened in Ukraine. They were, maybe you can even say the fault of Putin, and he can be faulted for this, is he should have realized this in 2014 when the United States pulled off this coup that Victoria Nuland is largely responsible for, with Jeffrey Pyatt, the ambassador to Ukraine. When that happened, that was, as you remember, the eastern provinces, Donetsk and Lugansk, were up in arms. They were already, and Crimea was up in arms. Those people are Russian ethnics. They're not going to go along with a new government that's anti-Russian. And that was the whole issue. So Putin maybe should have acted then, and he didn't want to, because he wanted to be, well, it was a very tenuous position with the United States too. He still believed, I believe, in a partnership. In our documentary, he kept saying, our partners. I got upset with him. I said, why are you always referring to the United States as your partners? They're not your partners. That was the essence of our disagreements. I was wondering. But he still believed in the possibility of negotiation. I believe that's what he thought would happen. He made warnings. About this. We're not going to have NATO on our southern in the Ukraine, and we can't. If I put weapons on the border of Canada or Mexico, you'd go nuts in the United States. You'd be at war. But you have no respect for us as a sovereign country. We're sovereign. Sovereignty means we do it our way. We're our country. You're not going to tell us how to run our country, which is exactly what John Kennedy is saying. We have to respect the sovereignty of these other countries, which we didn't do. After World War II, we ran over the sovereignty of Europe. England is basically a slave, is an intelligence agency working for us. And France, I mean, de Gaulle tried, and he did separate. And I think France has really shown some courage in the nuclear department, certainly. But the sovereignty of these countries has been compromised with military bases all over their countries, and Okinawa, Japan, Korea, Italy, Turkey. Now, Turkey, thank God, is coming back. They have some sovereignty now, we know, with Erdogan. But sovereignty is a key issue that he keeps mentioning in his speeches, and no one in the United States seems to pick up on it. They don't repeat his speeches properly. They distort his speeches into our line of propaganda.
Mr. Stone, I have two more questions, but before I go, Kynan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here still.
I want to give you an opportunity to ask any follow-up you want, and then we'll stop with two more questions.
Sure. Mr. Stone, I wanted to get your thoughts on a recent admission that RFK Jr. made on the Sean Hannity show when he was asked about the death of his father, excuse me. And he had said, I'll just quote it, that the day that my uncle was killed, I was picked up at Sidwell Friends School and brought home. The first phone call that my father made after J. Edgar Hoover told him that his brother had been shot was to the CIA desk officer in Langley. It was only a mile from our house, and then my father said to him, "Did your people do this?" And then he goes on to describe his father asking the same question to Henry Lewis, who was one of the Cuban Bay of Pigs leaders, and John McCone, the head of the CIA then. So I want your thoughts on his recent admission and the importance of a member of the Kennedy family saying something like this.
It is important, but I'm surprised because I knew this and we've heard it before. Robert Kennedy was clearly moving in that direction, and several people have come out and said that he was definitely going to reopen the case. Now that has been questioned, but it seems to hold up that people who knew his intention was he was going to reopen the case, and that scared a lot of people because they knew they were guilty. So that adds to the motivation to kill him. And as we know, that is one of the most screwed up assassinations of all time. It's really dumb. I mean, you have all the shots from the front, and it seems like he was shot from the rear, definitely with that second gun from the security guard called Cesar Thane, I think it was called. Robert Kennedy's been correct about this, and he knows it. And it's shocking to see his family, which should be more in the Kennedy spirit, not open up to this and condemn him like this. I think Robert's very, very, very guts. He's got the guts of his father and the guts of his uncle. And unfortunately, we don't see it in the rest of them. There is, this, I mean, where else do you see such a ridiculous cover story as Oswald shoots him from this impossible position, and then he gets killed by a thug who's got underground connections with a mob, and that thug in turn dies of cancer very suddenly a couple of years later before he goes to trial. So Oswald is prevented from going to trial because Oswald knows a lot, because he's a plant, he's a agent provocateur, the French would say. He's an agent used by the intelligence agencies. He goes to Russia, he goes blah, blah, blah. He does all the moves. They use him like they use pawns on a piece, but he's not an important pawn. He only becomes important in hindsight, and then they got to kill him fast. But it's a ridiculous story. I mean, people who see movies would know right away that something's fishy, but the country fell asleep again. This is why people don't react. I mean, the Warren report made people angry. The majority of people got angry, but again, nothing changed in that government. Our government is somewhat of a dictatorship in that way because it just locks in. Now we have a one-party state, basically, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. The defense budget goes up to $1 trillion. It doesn't matter. These people keep voting and voting because the money gets channeled back in contributions to themselves. So money has got to come out of politics, clearly, but beyond that, the whole concept of a country worth defending that we believe in is very, very remote now.
Mr. Stone, this will be kind of like the last question-ish, and then I'm just going to ask one more thing of you. Donald Trump, when he was asked, why didn't you release the Kennedy files, he said, if you saw what was in them, you wouldn't want to release them too. Now, could you, this is kind of like a two-part question, I guess. Like, one, do you think he's being honest about that, or is he lying? And secondly, if he's being honest, would it expose the same kind of apparatus that is involved in the cover-up of the Nord Stream?
Well, yeah, I understand. And what'd you say, the Gulf Stream?
Of the Nord Stream, blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a whole other story too. But definitely it falls in the same area of espionage. Now, if you have evidence of espionage, like you don't keep it on paper. It has to disappear. You have to shred it. You can't have incriminating information like that running around. So I highly doubt that there would be an incriminating piece of paper. All we were doing is trying to say, let's pry this, like Jim Garrison was doing in his trial, was trying to get a little more information. Pry it open. There are CIA agents whose files we know exist, but we can't get them. Those people would be people like Phillips, people like the guy in Florida, I forgot his name. There's a lot of these guys, Morales. I'm off the top of my head, I can't remember all the names, but there are people who worked on this case, and they knew Oswald, they knew all of the players, the Cubans, they knew the mob element was working with the CIA too. But there has to be a center, and there has to be an authority at the top. That's the only thing that makes sense. The authority that controls this thing is the CIA. and to some degree the FBI, but they don't work in tandem. They were competitive. But so sometimes some of the best information comes from the FBI because they don't know what's really going on. But James Angleton in counterintelligence plays a key role here, as does Richard Helms. Helms was the chief of the CIA eventually, and a key player. I believe he knows a lot. He knew a lot more. He lied his way through Congress, John. There was a joke when he appeared in front of the committee that Frank Church, the Church Committee. That was horrible what he did. Angleton too. They all lie, and but I don't know what Trump knows. He tends to be a melodramatic character, but he was the only one who actually, next to way back years ago, Garrison, he did try to do something, and then he backed off because those files were supposed to be released. Well, there was a date, 2016, I believe it was, and somebody got to him at the very last second and put pressure and said, "You can't do this." So what he's saying, if they knew what they knew, it doesn't make sense. They wouldn't have that. They would not have that on paper, in my opinion. But there would be good information about the CIA agents and their meetings and so forth. But I don't think that's going to come out either. I like Howard Hunt too, by the way. He's a minor player, but he did say a lot of things before he died. Howard Hunt is not to be ignored. These files are important.
Just the very last question, and then we'll be wrapped up. You bringing it to now and the importance of speaking up the truth. I know you really liked what I did against the New York Times and the executive editors of Reuters and Washington Post and stuff. And we're going to continue to keep doing these things. Tynan and I are involved in training other people to do it because they recognize us now. We were barred from going into a congressional town hall in New York. They told us you're not allowed in. So
are they allowed to do that?
Well, I don't got the money for a lawyer. I'm sure not. But one of the things we do, though, no matter whenever we train people, is we tell them to speak the truth unapologetically. And I think you're an expert in that. And another expert in that is Seymour Hersh. Seymour Hersh is just saying what he knows, talking and reporting what he knows. And I think he's almost 80 years old or over 80 years old now. So he's doing his thing. He's just saying, you know what, I'm just going to publish it. And he said that he took the Nordstream story to Substack, and he said the last place he was going to take it to was the New York Times. What is your reflection and observation on that story and on Seymour Hersh in general?
Well, on Nordstream, I do believe that the United States had to know. I mean, when Joe Biden said that so clearly in a speech before it blew up, that it's not going to go through. He almost said it point blank. He was determined to stop it. So Biden was very much aware of the situation. What exactly happened, I don't know. Maybe they used Ukrainians. I'm sure they did, but it's, the motive is so clear that, it's ridiculous the United States first cover story was the Russians who did it, which I find to be ridiculous. The Nord Stream was very important to Joe Biden, and it did sever the relationship between Russia and Europe, and that has hurt Europe more than it hurt Russia. That's what this unbelievable thing is. Germany really went along with it. That was German property as well as Russian property. They blew it up. Germany did nothing because of this. I'm saying this new chancellor, he's not really a very strong man. He seems to be cowed. In fact, he was booed the other day by his own party in Germany. I read that Scholz was booed because they're so unhappy with. He's destroyed the German economy. Essentially, they've allowed the Americans to take over and dictate to them that they're going to do liquid natural gas is going to come from the U.S. plus other countries, and that Germany is going to abide by these higher prices. As a result, Germany, which already destroyed its nuclear plants, is now really in a hole. France is doing better with energy than Germany, and much less the coal plants that Germany. Oh, it's a nightmare. Germany has lost its standing. When you remember when we went to the Iraq War, Germany and France did not go with us. The prime minister said no. They had some sovereignty. That's pretty interesting that they at least said no to the United States on a major war that we went into. But where was I? I'm sorry. The pipeline, right? Oh yeah, on Hersh. I know Hersh, and we've had, I think he's done some very good work on My. He did some very good work. I don't know if his Nordstream story holds. I mean, I've heard pro and con. I haven't really investigated it, but Hersh, on the other hand, has done a lot of damage. And you have perhaps not know of this, but you should look at his book he wrote on Camelot. It was a very poor reporting job, and it's been outed. And he tried basically to go after the Kennedy myth, and he used. You see, when Kennedy was killed, that's when the forces that were against Kennedy all started to come out of the woodwork. The CIA among them, all these people that worked with him gave information that was damaging to the Kennedys, such as they were behind the assassination attempts on Castro. Not so. There's no evidence of it at all. And Jim DiEugenio has been on this case for a long time. He reads everything. He was my main researcher on my JFK Revisited. Absolutely not true. Kennedy was not into assassination, did not think it would work, and knew it would backfire. But Hersh hints at all this stuff, and the sleaze with the gangsters and the women. And so Hersh is very much a Puritan in his mentality, Puritan, and he has this, I call it, vulnerable side where he sees sex as some kind of mortal wound or something. That he's a strange guy, Hersh. I would counsel you to be cautious in what he writes. He's good, but he's getting his information from CIA people, and he's admitted as such. And that CIA person who he particularly got information on Camelot was the assistant to Richard Helms during all this process. I forgot his name, but he gave a lot of information on the Kennedys, against the Kennedys, to Hersh. So that the source has to be questioned there.
Okay, perfect. I'm out of questions. I think that's it, Kynan. If there's anything else, now's the time.
No, I think this is good place to stop.
Good.
Yeah, Mr. Stone, I again want to thank you for giving us the time to do this. And just, if you could just give me like a 10-second, like, I endorse the Kennedy speech, because we really want people to watch it this weekend. And
I just want to make one comment to you in your note to me.
yes.
I got to pee. 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Who are you picking tonight? Basketball was.
Oh, the Nuggets.
No, I want Miami to win. I like underdogs. Always for the underdog.
No. Nuggets are the underdogs because they've never made it to the final.
Are you kidding me? They're bigger. Don't you see the difference? I mean, come on. You got to give it to Miami. They're scrappy. They really hung in there, and they don't give up.
We'll see. I was with the Celtics.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to win, but you got to root for the underdog. It's like,
yeah. Sure.
Okay.
No, I hear you. Anyway, I'm sorry. You said you're going to give me a comment on a note that I sent you?
In your note, just for your own dialogue, when you speak, you say here, okay, Newland, Blinken, and others was to provoke an invasion by Russia and to completely destroy them as a sovereign nation. Now, that's a big statement, to completely destroy them as a sovereign nation. I would say tone that down a little bit, and to bring regime change to Russia, in which they would divide up Russia, break it into economic parts, more like a Yeltsin kind of scenario than it's such a huge country. I mean, it's so insane. Completely destroy Russia. I would avoid words like that.
No, you're right. They're trying to, well, balkanize it, I think, is more
that's
appropriate.
Correct. It's not like Napoleon going to Moscow and, trying to conquer Russia in 15. The other thing you wanted from me is an endorsement of the speech.
The sixth, yeah.
So I believe that John Kennedy's peace speech at American University in June of 1963, it's a commencement speech he gave, was one of the classic speeches of American history, up there with FDR's Depression speech and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And it's one of the great eloquent speeches written by Ted Sorensen and him. It gets to the essence of American generosity and cooperation because cooperation without cooperation, this world will perish. We need to cooperate. And anyone who's following the world situation can see that America has gone wrong and is hostile and very nervous about its position in the world. It's questioning its right to be at the center and going after any country that challenges it, whether it's China, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Russia. These countries have not challenged us. They're just trying to get their space and their air, and what comes to them, their national interests are what matters to them. And we're not taking that into account. We say that their national interests are against our values. Well, that's not so. That's not so. And you have to re-examine what American values are and what the sovereign interests of other nations are. When you realize that, you'll realize that there are no enemies, really. There are no enemies unless you pick a fight. It's like a schoolyard, you got to go pick a fight, and you got to call the other guy names and all that kind of stuff. And that's what we've been doing. Look at the other side and look what they're saying, and try to listen always to what the other side says. Know your supposed enemy, because maybe he's not your enemy. Maybe he's your friend or your partner. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Stone. Thank you so much.
Recording stopped.
We can end it there.
Jose, keep me apprised of what you're up to and your next, all your actions. I'd love to know what's going on with your intervention, so to speak.
Yes, and you'll be happy to know, actually, next month, friends of mine named Due Dissidence, they have filmed a documentary about the interventions and me, and it'll be premiering next month or so. I'm sure we can send you a link for you to watch it.
I'd love to see it. What's it called?
I don't know what the documentary is going to be called, but they are called Due Dissidence. That's the name of their production company, if you want to.
I don't know what say it again.
Due, like DUE, Dissidence, DISSIDENCE.
Okay.
And that's the name of their production company. But other than that, Mr. Stone, again, thank you kindly. I'll keep you updated on any exciting things we do.
Give me a plug for my book. Well, what's it called? Just say in your book something. The one I wrote, the memoir. You didn't mention
Chasing the Light. That one, right?
Just for a moment, please.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about your book, Chasing the Light.
Oh, you read it?
Did I read it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I read it. I really liked the introduction because you were going after something that I think I and Kynan, as young men who are broke, okay, who come from the circumstances we come from. I'm from the South Bronx. He's from Queens. You're trying to achieve a goal by no matter what it takes. You have to do it. And right now, Kynan and I's goal is to try and save the world. We really don't want the world to be blown up in a nuclear explosion. And when you're recounting your filming Salvador and how you guys were going near bankrupt just to finish your first film was awfully inspiring.
Good. I wanted it to reach out to a younger generation because I think it's an eternal struggle. A young person trying to make it in this world, trying to find a spot, a sovereign spot, a place where he can feel comfortable with the world, at home. And that took a long time. It wasn't easy. I was after Vietnam, and it took many years. It took 7, 8 years for me to really break through and get heard and get a place. And I talk about the rejections more than the successes. And I want people to realize that rejection is a part of it too, because then makes you stronger. And you have to be humble in the sense of that's what's going to happen. You're going to get your ass kicked. And by the way, I'm still getting my ass kicked. It hasn't changed. I mean, I've had successes. It's true. But it's also more failure than successes. Just think I want to help another generation because frankly, our hope is in another generation. The world is going to be yours. I hope you take care of it. Good luck. All right, Jose.
Well, thank you kindly, Mr. Stone.
Thank you.
Take care.
And your name is Ilwin?
Oh, my Kynan. Kynan. Kynan.
K-Y-N-A-N.
Kynan.
Kanan is the rapper from Sudan. You ever heard?
I've never heard of him before.
He's great. I tried to cast him as Bob Marley in a movie. He was a great rapper. Beautiful music. Kanan. You're Canadian.
Yeah, Kynan. You can call me Kai for short. That's easier for some.
Kai, are you Hawaiian or something?
No, it's actually a Welsh name.
Oh, I see. Well,
Mhm.
good luck to you. Okay, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.